So when you say the book of Isaiah is intact, how similar is it to the book of Isaiah that's in the Bible?
So that one is fascinating. So this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but when we discovered the Great Isaiah Scroll, previous to that, the earliest copy of Isaiah that we had was in the Masoretic text, which is in the Middle Ages.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it was literally 1,000 years. We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
Word for word.
Word for word.
This little exchange has created quite a stir. First, Alex O'Connor said Wes was wrong.
That would be amazing if it were true.
And then Gavin Ortland said Wes isn't really that wrong.
The general point that Wes was making seems totally correct here.
And then Dan McClellan says that Alex O'Connor, Gavin Ortland, and Wes are all wrong.
In this video, I'm going to be correcting both gentlemen.
And then Dan says that he is kind of wrong too.
I began that section of my video by saying the Great Isaiah Scroll differs from the Masoretic text in virtually every single verse of the book of Isaiah. And that's not correct.
And now Wes has acknowledged that his original statement was inaccurate.
Should I have been more careful in my statement on Rogan about the Great Isaiah Scroll and used much more precise language, something to the effect of nearly identical rather than word for word identical, in order to not bring unnecessary and unfortunate scrutiny upon my discussion with him? Yes.
In terms of who has their facts straight, Dan is quoting the scholars who have actually worked on the scrolls. And Wes himself has acknowledged that his statement was inaccurate. Wes's response to Wes and Dan's response to Dan are both essentially correct and in agreement, and they are reflecting the scholarly data that is not really up for dispute. So now that we have all that settled, I want to take a step back from this discussion and answer two questions behind Rogan's question with real concrete examples from the Bible. Rogan asks how similar the Great Isaiah Scroll is to our Bible. This assumes that our Bible refers to a single thing, when in reality, every English Bible is, of course, a translation. And they differ from one another. The question of how similar the Great Isaiah Scroll is to our Bible depends on which English version of the Bible you happen to be reading. Although English versions often follow what is called the Masoretic text, which, if you don't know, is our text from around 1000 AD. That's the one that Wes mentioned, and it has been the standard Hebrew text of the Bible for centuries. So English versions sometimes follow the Masoretic text, but this is not always the case. So we cannot assume that whatever the Masoretic text says is what is actually in the English version you are reading. So the first question we are trying to answer is, how do scholars decide in the first place what our Bible consists of? Let's illustrate with an example from part of Isaiah 7:14, where the Masoretic text and the Great Isaiah Scroll differ. Ancient versions differ on who is calling the prophesied baby to be born Emmanuel. The Great Isaiah Scroll, as well as the Small Isaiah Scroll at Qumran, have Vekara Shmo Immanuel, and he will call his name Emmanuel. The Masoretic text, on the other hand, like we said, is slightly different. It has Vekarat, here the t, Shmo Immanuel. So that's the difference, Vekara, Vekarat, which means you or she will call his name Emmanuel. So that's the Masoretic text. The Greek versions are divided on this issue. One of the earliest and best manuscripts, Codex Vaticanus, has Kaikaleses to onoma autou Immanuel, and you will call his name Emmanuel. This agrees with the Masoretic text, though it interprets the Hebrew as you rather than she, which we'll come back to in a minute. Another early Greek manuscript is Codex Sinaiticus. It says, Kai kalese to onoma autou Emmanuel, instead of kaleses, kalese, and he will call his name Emmanuel. This agrees with the Isaiah Scrolls at Qumran. Other Greek manuscripts provide even more readings. For more on some of the interpretive issues in this verse, and it is indeed a complex verse, you can check out my video on this verse responding to one of Dan's earlier videos. But let's come back to Rogan's question. whether or not the Isaiah text in the Dead Sea Scrolls matches our Bible, or the English version you are reading. This depends, of course, like we said, on which English version you happen to be holding in your hands, or looking at it on a screen. For example, here are some different English versions of this verse. New American Standard Bible says, "She will call his name Emmanuel," and most modern English versions agree with this. This is the standard interpretation of the Masoretic text. The International Standard Version, which is a version that says it follows the Great Isaiah Scroll more closely, says, "And his name will be called Emmanuel." This is a passive, which is the best understanding of the text as it stands in the Great Isaiah Scroll. Again, you can check out my video on this verse if you want all the full grammatical details. Finally, the Net Bible says, "You, young woman, will name him Emmanuel." This follows the Masoretic text, but it interprets the Masoretic text like the Septuagint interprets it, at least in Codex Vaticanus. And this is an understandable way to take it, but in my opinion, it is incorrect. Each of these Bible translations was done by a committee of scholars that tried to figure out the best translation of the text in each particular verse. This is often based on critical commentaries, like Williamson's commentary on Isaiah in the International Critical Commentary series, where he reasons that the Masoretic text is the best text because the relevant section in Isaiah 7:14 is almost identical to the relevant section in Genesis 16:11, which has ve-karat instead of ve-kara, which is what the Masoretic text says. I think this is probably correct, and I could give more reasons why I think this is the best reading. However, the crucial point is that only some of our Bibles reflect this. When scholars translate the Bible, they have to decide in each verse whether they are going to prioritize the Masoretic text, the Septuagint, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or some other textual witness. And yes, there are even more still. This is done on a case-by-case basis. In other instances, many English versions do not follow the Masoretic text. A great example of this is in 1 Samuel 13:1. The ESV translates this exactly as it's found in the Masoretic text, and it says, "Saul lived for 1 year and then became king." So Saul became king as an infant. This is probably wrong. Many modern English versions, such as the NIV, opt to translate this as we have it in later Greek manuscripts. The NIV says Saul was 30 years old when he became king. More plausible. So these are obviously two different things, right? You're either 1 when you become king or 30. The point in all of this is that our English Bibles are translated by scholars who are trying to decide the best reading of every given passage where there are variations. So the answer to Rogan's question is really that it depends on what English version you are using to see how well it aligns with the Great Isaiah Scroll. Since scholars today generally recognize that the Masoretic text, which has been the main Hebrew text we have used in translations for centuries, is not always correct. The second question that seems to be behind Rogan's question is about the reliability of the Bible in general. At this point, let's go back to Wes's original claim as a lens through which to view this issue. Remember, Wes already said that he misspoke about the word-for-word identity between the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic text. So we're going to leave that off the table, okay? But let's just think for a moment, right? What would a word-for-word identification imply? Word-for-word identification would probably be a dead giveaway that the document was a forgery. Or it would be a miracle, as Rogan suggests later in the interview. We don't expect word-for-word identification between any two manuscripts because scribes are people who are copying down thousands of words by hand. The question is, can we, by and large, rely on these scribes to copy what the original biblical authors wrote down? Or at least, can we rely on them to copy the manuscript from one scroll to another? And what did the Dead Sea Scrolls teach us about the reliability of the various biblical manuscripts we have? The foremost expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls is Emmanuel Tove. Unfortunately, I can't say I had the chance to study with him when I did my doctorate at Hebrew University, where he is a professor, or else this would be a great time to say that I just studied with him. But I was privileged to study with one of his protege students, now Dean of Hebrew University, and another textual critic expert, Michael Siegel, as well as Esther Chazon, the former head of the Orion Center for the Study of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can check out my interview with her on the Dead Sea Scrolls in the description. So what does Tov say about the texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they relate to the Masoretic text, which is the sort of standard Hebrew text that many translations work from? In Tov's standard textbook on textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible, he explains that the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls helped us to better understand the plurality of biblical traditions as represented in a variety of textual witnesses. Before 1947, when the scrolls were found, the predominant approach was to just privilege the Masoretic text almost blindly over and against the other two major textual traditions we had even before the scrolls were found, which are the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, called the Septuagint, as we have said, and the Samaritan Pentateuch. Yes, the Samaritans have a Bible of their own. The Dead Sea Scrolls showed that there were some extant Hebrew versions around the 1st century that looked more like the Masoretic text. Sometimes these are called like Proto-Masoretic texts, and others looked more like the Septuagint or the Samaritan Pentateuch. In rare cases, some even looked different from any of these. Of course, the vast majority of these differences are minor, but they are differences nonetheless. What we learned from this is just that the textual tradition is more complex than what we first realized, as most issues are. Not necessarily less accurate, but more complex. You cannot simply take the Masoretic text to be the best text in every case, because it is the one that happened to be handed down to us for centuries and centuries. We have already shown that modern English versions sometimes opt to translate according to the Masoretic text, and sometimes they go against the Masoretic text and choose a different version, showing that they do not think it is the best text. Each verse has its own considerations. Dan has also helpfully done some math for us and told us that there is about 90 to 95% identity between the Masoretic text and the Great Isaiah Scroll. This means that the vast majority of meaningful units in the two texts are identical in meaning. What is great about the last 5 to 10% is that the Dead Sea Scrolls have given us more data to help us decide in each case which text is best. This is what the field of textual criticism is all about. You take different manuscript traditions and witnesses and try to determine the text that is most likely to be what the original author wrote. We do not have the original autographs of any book of the Bible, nor of almost any writing in the ancient world. That's just the situation we're in today. As Wes said in his correction video, many scholars have noted the many similarities between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text, and have concluded that we can be more confident, not less, that a text like the Masoretic text is not a mere fabrication, even though it dates to 2,000 years after the original autographs in some cases. Now scholars are busy going through all the verses to determine which readings are most likely to be original. So no, the Masoretic text does not match word for word the Great Isaiah Scroll. But with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we are in a far better position to produce Bible translations that reflect what the original authors wrote than we ever have been in modern human history.